Today, we're going to be talking about the UK, the future of the UK, cultural identity, integration, and the political landscape around our favorite topic, immigration, which we seem to be very focused on these days. We're joined by Jack Hardiker, who is a supporter of Reform UK, which is one of the fastest growing political parties in the UK. He's also been a supporter of the protest that's happened in the UK a couple of months ago. Really glad to have you on, Jack.
How you doing, Heidi? You okay?
Yeah, great, thanks. Great. A bit ill, so if I sneeze on you guys, I've warned you. So, Jack, I'm going to go straight into it. You are white British. You're born and bred here. You have generations to this land. What do you feel is the biggest threat to your homeland?
Um, I think there's, I think immigration partly, but kind of immigration where the cultures don't mix. I think we want immigration in Britain. I think every year or so we've got around 600,000 people that leave the United Kingdom, and because we have quite a poor birth rate, especially in the modern day, we need to have a hundreds, thousands of people coming in at least. But I think the problem is we've got 1.2 million. And I think with those people coming in, if we don't build the infrastructure that those people need, such as health, education, kind of community services, things like that, then it will lead to more demand for those services and a kind of static supply. So I guess in terms of threat for Britain, I don't know if I think it's a threat to Britain's existence. That would probably be quite extreme. But I think there are growing groups in Britain who are coming in that don't want our values and perhaps want to change our values. I think we've seen kind of the burning of the UK flag at the Black Lives Matter protests. We've seen, I guess, the pro-Palestinian protests. So I'm in Leeds now, and I've seen a pro-Palestinian protest kind of in Leeds Station, and then also kind of by the Leeds War Memorial. So these are kind of consistent weekend activities for people. And then I'm all for protest, but I think it has to be within reasonable means. And I think you look at the public order offence and what people can get arrested for, and when people kind of are, doing very provocative chants towards Judaism and Israel, and I guess like holding up kind of mesh dead babies. I don't think that's pleasant. And I also just kind of question how disrupting Leeds Station or planting next to a war memorial will really help the people of Palestine or the conflict. I mean, I think regarding this conflict, we are probably more on the same side where we just want it to come to an end. I don't want Israel to be attacked by terrorists, and at the same time, I don't want Israel to hurt innocent civilians living in neighbouring countries. But that becomes increasingly difficult when these terrorist cells like Hezbollah and Hamas have gaining control, and they are willing to, I guess, use civilians as human shields. But in terms of threat to the UK, I guess, yeah, a growing number of people that want to perhaps change to the UK that I don't think will benefit the British citizens. And I think that does include people that have immigrated to the UK as well. People immigrated to the UK because they wanted freedom, they wanted liberty, they wanted a fair chance at life. And I'll just finish with this first point with a quick anecdote. But basically, I was in London. There was a second shooting on my road in the year, and I was talking to a Nigerian guy, and he'd immigrated here, got 5 kids now. They've all settled in, really doing well, contributing to our society. But he kind of had to go at me in the sense that, like, you guys need to get your act together. Like, why? Like, I've come here for a better life from Nigeria, an economic migrant, and now I'm seeing stuff on a regular basis, like shootings, bad levels of crime and gang activity. Like, I moved to the UK to get away from this, but it seems like the police are less powerful to uphold law and order. And I think it's an important point because I think we're not going in a good direction. But I think at the same time, that's why reform is gaining more traction. And perhaps I feel like with every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you be extremely liberal with immigration, you will generate an extremely conservative reaction. And I think that's kind of why people are now asking questions about immigration. Can we reduce it to an extent? Can we just have this debate without being called racist? So, yeah.
That's the issue, right? It's difficult to have this conversation without being labeled something, and we've seen that it's a genuine concern for people, for decades. It's been actually a genuine concern, and there's an issue with the amount of if you speak to the average person, I don't think they have an issue with immigration. They see it as something that, people come here, they contribute, they add value, they work hard with kind of I integration itself is difficult, but, people work towards that. It's, I guess, the level that we're seeing, and going back to your point, you made a number of points there, which is one, you have to have the right infrastructure, right? Which is a question on whether that's a government issue versus an immigrant issue, because it's, if people come here and they contribute and pay taxes, that should be used also to kind of create the right infrastructure that reduces the pressure on the system. And it seems like that's been mismanaged quite badly from Labor and conservative political parties. But you mentioned there's something about values. One of the main issues that you're seeing is that people are coming here and there's a clash of values. Can you just go a bit deeper on that? What is the values that you see that are being clashed exactly? And is it a particular type of immigrant that you think is clashing with that? How do you differentiate between kind of the right immigration versus the immigration that might not be appropriate for this country?
Yeah, I think it's really the values of liberal democracy and freedom of speech against kind of anti-democratic, more socialist kind of conforming voices. And I don't think those voices come exclusively from outside of the UK. We have our own version of that in terms of the UK Communist Party, which was probably very kind of growing in popularity before the Second World War, and even with the rise of communism in general. But obviously, we went in a different direction. But I think at the same
And
time,
sorry to cut. Even talking about freedom of speech issues, like following the protests of the UK, which debatable whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but a lot of people are now going to prison for what they said
mm,
online, and that's being done by the UK government,
mm,
which is the Labour government. So that's a interesting kind of route that the UK that we're taking really, and a very dangerous
yeah,
route.
yeah. And yeah, it's interesting because Starmer ran on this completely moderate platform, basically just criticizing the anti-Tories. And even as I was criticizing the Tories, and I watched Starmer's speech, and perhaps it was a bit hopeful. Like he just kind of gave some generic election promises, and he definitely ran as a moderate and is now governing like a socialist. And I think we didn't hear anything about kind of taking away the winter fuel payment. We didn't hear anything about people being arrested for what they post on social media. So it's all a bit bizarre, to be honest. I think most people that voted Labour, and even some like Labour diehard loyalists, are a bit shocked at the direction the government's taken in its first few months in charge.
Well, it's also difficult, I think, for I think they're being very reactionary, but also it's very difficult because we haven't seen such protests since maybe the BLM protest, which happened, was that in 2020?
2020. I'd say
Yeah.
the initial Palestinian ones were quite large as well, but I'd say these are the first ones that actually descended into nationwide riots, maybe in
Yeah,
like
the
10 years.
Palestinian ones, they were large. There was a lot of people, but they weren't burning buildings,
Mm, mm,
yes, there might have been some chanting that is inappropriate,
mm,
in the UK, but again, it was a kind of a there were hundreds of thousands of protesters,
mm.
pro-Palestinian protesters, and only a small minority that were kind of making those chants or had those placards that were very questionable, but they weren't burning buildings,
Yeah, yeah.
or throwing
They
stuff
they
at the
didn't descend
police.
directly into riots, I don't believe. Yeah,
Yeah,
although it
yeah.
definitely wasn't as much, to be fair, yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the values question, so you said basically it's the freedom of expression, liberty. Do you feel like those are the two main things that are under attack?
Yeah, I just think like, with immigration, we want to have a conversation. And I think the voting public, the voting British citizens should be able, and like this, by the way, when I say British citizens, I think a lot of people presume I'm just talking about white British people, but that's not the case. I'm talking about immigrants that have naturalized. We were talking before, we don't really like that word, but naturalized and do have the right to vote. And I think we should be able to debate and have a discussion about immigration. And, the Green Party, the Lib Dems kind of just want to say, no, no, we're pro-immigration and there's nothing to see here and move on. But I think you've seen that increasingly. I mean, Labour, the Conservatives, and Reform, the three largest parties in the UK in terms of votes, ran on kind of we will reduce immigration policies, and the Conservatives have run on that for a while. Obviously, Reform and UKIP and previous Farage parties have run on that. But yeah, I think there's people that if they don't agree with your opinion, they want to shut you down. I feel like back in the day in the UK, it was more kind of like, for example, my parents have voted Conservative all their life. They never voted for Tony Blair, but they respected that Tony Blair had the backing of the people and one of the largest majorities and vote shares ever when he came in 1997 and 2001. And I feel like today, and this is kind of coming out of the universities, there's a growing, it is kind of socialism, but even more communism, where it's like if you express centre-right views, it's very much we want to shut you down, like we don't want to hear it. But yeah, I think when Starmer does things like arrest people for posting online, and I think I definitely criticise the posts, but there's so many points on this, but I don't think it's healthy for us to treat technological posts as what someone would say in person, if that makes sense. I think that's quite dangerous, and that's showing how we've perhaps become too reliant on technology. I believe her name is Bernie Spafforth. I might have got her name wrong there, but she was infamously arrested for saying she retweeted something about the identity of the Southport killer. I think there was a post suggesting that he was a asylum seeker and a Muslim, and she reposted something about that. And she put, "If this is true," and then said, kind of, this. I can't remember what she said, but she said something that could have been characterized as threatening. To be fair, but I think the big point was she said, "If this is true." Now, I think the police are probably within their right to investigate and ask questions and determine. I think they should use social media posts more as surveillance as to whether actual crimes are going to be committed, rather than just see something on social media and say, "Okay, arrest this now." Like if I go on.
It's difficult because I agree to what you're saying, but when it goes the other way, when you have kind of like terrorism kind of public announcements being made, obviously the public wants the police to go after those people that are making those posts on social media, and you don't want kind of
Mm,
this kind of like two-tier policing. I guess you have to either take posts seriously or not, not based on what race. So I
yeah,
see the
yeah.
difficulty there a bit.
Um,
So Reform UK is one of the fastest growing political parties. Um, And it feels like a lot of people I think the reason, the appeal that I see with Reform UK is that it's not something that is, associated with slight changes, which is what I see Labour as, or what the Conservatives are. The Conservatives and Labour for me is, okay, we'll do some slight changing and improvement, where Reform
mm,
UK is we're going to change it, the whole thing, pretty much. And a
mm,
lot of people, I guess, are tired of the constant we're going to change things, but we don't actually change anything. And Reform UK has a whole list of very,
mm,
some might consider extreme
mm.
changes, but necessary changes. Do you, as a supporter of Reform UK, what is the biggest thing that attracted you to it?
I think it was being able, not being influenced by lobbyists, and being able to fully kind of express views without considering the impact, really. And I think that's true. I think people should really come out and say stuff, and then you should be invited to. You should invite criticism. You should invite, well, I don't agree with this because I think when I think about policies, I think properly restructuring the NHS, but at the same time, you'd have to manage. Um, you need to make sure that the corporate capture doesn't happen like it has in the United States, where you develop like a sick care culture and everything is just let's take a pill, let's take a pill.
Yeah, and I think the first point you made also, which is basically, I think, from what I understand, from what you're saying also, is that what they're not afraid to say things,
Yeah,
and I think that is very attractive for people because people are tired of kind of dancing around the lines of the thing that they want to say, where Reform UK is just saying it. At the same time, that I feel causes a lot of issues and it can be misinterpreted by a lot of people in two ways. One, it attracts a certain segment of people that is always associated with reform, which is kind of the racist kind of group. And number two, it pushes a lot of other people away that they feel if reform came into power, it would be a threat to them, and that group would be kind of first generation or second generation British immigrants. Do you see one actually? Do you why do you feel there is this kind of image of racists being attracted to Reform UK?
yeah. I think, sadly, I think when you run on a bold policy platform, you perhaps invite kind of extremists and conspiracy theorists to that side. So, for example, Reform is Reform. I think they will keep this for the next general election, but Reform wants to, rather than have a net zero sustainability policy, have net zero migration, i.e., the number of people coming into the country equals the number of people leaving the country. And in return, you can put more of the focus and emphasis of the workforce on the domestic population and reduce unemployment and, I guess, prioritize British citizens. I think how is that kind of policy different to now? It would be a significant increase in legal immigration into this country. I think roughly about half, to be honest, because we have 600,000 leaving, roughly 1.34 million. I think the net at the moment is 750,000. So Reform will be looking to take that right down. But you would still have,
Is that achievable? I mean, if we're looking at, I think that the net migration every year has been like 600,000. I think that's net
yeah,
migration. To reduce that to zero for a growing economy where the birth rate is struggling and there's kind of like a inverted pyramid of more people being kind of elderly than working population, which is happening across all Europe. How is it achievable to have a zero net migration policy? In theory, it sounds great for a lot of people, but in practice, it would it seems to it would destroy the economy in many different ways, from services to taxes, to supply pensions and other things like that for pensioners and elderly people or the NHS. How would that work?
I think the success of it is dependent on getting people who are claiming on the welfare state back into work. I think looking to increase the productive capacity of Britain, Reform is looking at the people within Britain that currently aren't working that probably could work. I think the welfare state has grown far too large, and it was originally designed for people that are physically and mentally unable to work. And I think there's more and more people that it's kind of easier to claim. I know kind of David Cameron tried some reforms with universal credit, but it's increasingly easier to claim. And Tony Blair did various reforms to the welfare system. So I agree with what you're saying. I think if we kept our welfare system as it is and wanted to go to net zero migration, that would definitely lead to shortages. But at the same time, I think we need to. The success of it is basically dependent on reducing people's need for welfare and getting them back into work and into low skilled jobs. And it's also about changing the culture that immigrants don't come into Britain to just simply do low skilled jobs and fill these vacancies. that British people can do these as well. And rather than kind of go to university, or even if they want to study at university, they could do a part-time job, working in a low-skilled job to help pay. And we could make the universities more, I guess, dependent or accountable for their fees rather than the government funding them. And then, you get a loan, it gets written off after 25 years. So I think there are ways we can, I think it can be achieved. It depends on getting young people into low skilled labor. And, some people might look and say, oh, well, I want to be a intellectual genius that goes to university and, I'm far too good for a low skilled job. But I mean, I've worked as a pot wash, I've worked as a waiter, done low skilled jobs. It really does give you a grounding. And I think if you go to university is good for people that, want to study academia, or they definitely need that degree in order to kind of get a particular profession. But I mean, I went to university and I completed a grad scheme, and I got a grad scheme from that. But I'm seeing people now that have worked their way up in a call center, and they're doing just as well as me, and they don't have any debt. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't have any debt. And to be
Yeah.
honest, in 25 years, my debt will get written off. I think we need to allow less international students and encourage more British students that want to go to university, high proportion of British students at universities, and make sure that universities aren't kind of dependent on foreign students for their income. And there's definitely cuts that can be made. I've kind of gone to a different topic here, but basically to summarize, if we want net zero migration to work, you've got to gut the welfare state, and you've got to encourage individuals back into low-skilled work to fill those shortages. I mean, I think like with social care, for example, lots of social care vacancies. Perhaps people would say social care jobs are more commonly to be taken by immigrants in the modern day. But I mean, I just think in a society, what a great grounding it would be for someone who's finished school to go and care for an older individual. Like, that would be such a great form of respect and a way of giving
It is.
back.
Yeah,
So
it is.
I know what you mean. If we do it and don't change anything, I think it will be unfeasible and damage the economy. But I think other levers can be pulled to try and make it work. And you've got to be practical as well. Like, you can't just cut it down straight away, for example. You've got to look at shortages and vacancies. But I think perhaps over 5 years, reform can build a path to net zero migration.
Possibly. I think the fact that you have those roles available, and they're being filled not by locals, British people, but by immigrants, says possibly that there are people that don't want those roles because they are difficult. Like, being a nurse is a difficult job. That the rewards you get from a financial reward perspective is very low for the stress, the emotional demand that it requires. And some people just don't want to do those jobs. And I guess you can't force people to do a job. That's number one. Number two, I agree. Universities, I think there needs to be kind of a restructure on that, because for a lot of courses or degrees, it's just a 3-year piss up, pretty much.
Okay.
For
That
a
was
lot of
my
times,
degree.
right?
That was my degree.
Oh,
That
what
was the
degree did you
informal
do?
name of my degree.
Yeah. So I understand that. You're right. I think, like, yeah, if you want to be a dentist, a doctor, engineer, those kind of roles, yeah, you need, a university. But for a lot of times, you can go and actually get that experience instead of going to university, and you'll be much further ahead possibly than if you went to university. I think it's very difficult for universities to ignore international students because that's where most of their income actually comes from. It's, I was an international student, and the difference in pay that I had to pay versus a local person is like we're subsidizing, the local people. But going back to kind of the question, which was why is the image of reform one that attracts racists? What do you feel is the reason for that?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I think it's really because people that are racist are extremes in terms of migration policy. So people that are racist do not want any kind of immigration at all. And they
Okay.
perhaps want.
And that's if that's the platform for Reform UK, I guess it will always attract that kind of group of people.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's not the platform for Reform UK is reducing legal immigration. It's not stopping immigration at all. So, I mean, I think if they are racist, they are completely irrational. Obviously, these people are irrational, because they don't like people based on the color of their skin or their religion. Um, but reform is looking to reduce legal immigration, whereas these people are looking to stop immigration at all, and potentially they might want to like deport non-white people, for example. And I think as soon as they realise that that's not reform's platform, and as soon as they realise that reform is growing in popularity with ethnic minorities, who are actually more popular across ethnic minorities than the Liberal Democrats. And we've got our chairman, Zia Youssef, who did a great performance on Question Time the other day. We've got kind of candidates in Birmingham and London that are non-white, that are, doing really well. So I think I agree with you. It's most of it is media spin, to be honest, and I really think people see through the media now. Like I just do not. 10 years ago, I think they did a number on UKIP and Farage and kept them at quite a low number of seats and vote rate. I just don't think it's going to work anymore. Like with alternative platforms and the ability for people to go onto YouTube and to cross-reference and to go onto X and see things happening in real time, and then you see BBC, Sky News, ITV that don't report it. I just think people are going to see through the facade that Reform is a racist party.
Mm. Yeah, it's one of those interesting ones. I think Nigel Farage is probably one of the, he for a lot of people he's one of the most hated person
Yeah, he's
in the
mad.
UK.
He's like Trump in America, isn't he? Like people either love
Yeah,
him. I think to be fair, after his I'm a Celebrity appearance and what he's done with GB News, I think he's more popular now than he's ever been. But there's always been that group of people that they talk about like Farage derangement syndrome, Trump. You see like James O'Brien, for example. Like there's always people like that.
yeah. I do think he's different to Trump. I think though you cannot deny that whatever your views on Nigel Farage is, he does love his country and he's doing what he thinks is the best for his country.
Yeah,
I think you could definitely agree on that. I guess the way he's doing it, a lot of people disagree with that method. One of the things that you just mentioned, which is the deportation of people, one of the policies of Reform UK, which is one that kind of, when I look at all the policies of Reform UK, they're very common sense policies
yeah.
that I think are probably they're great. The most
That's
of them
one
you
vote I've
cannot
got.
argue are
That's
not.
one vote I've got on the podcast. Then no worries. Then no, I'm joking.
Not yet, not yet. But one of the things that there's two things that kind of jump at me. One is it, it it seems to be very like fairy daisy, where I don't think it matches to reality. I don't think we can kind of fund the expenditure that Reform UK envisages. So I feel like they're going to come short on a lot of those policies. And number two, there's one thing in particular which they have under immigration, which is you withdraw citizenship from immigrants who commit crime. And for a lot of people, they'll look at that and say that sounds like a common sense thing, but I guess it's also a very dangerous thing, because who decides what crime you could do where we can take your citizenship away? And doesn't that go against the definition of being a citizen of a country? I understand maybe with like the girl Begum, where she flew to Syria and was, even though she was young,
I can't
she
remember her
was
name
kind of
though. Shamima Begum.
Shamina
Shamima
Begum, I
Begum.
think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Shamina Begum. So I understand that they took her citizenship because she was involved in terrorist activities, and it's question on maybe she was too young. She was kind of like duped into kind of going all there, all that stuff. But then what crimes will result in citizenships being lost by people? For a lot of people, that's a scary thing. That's an attack on the concept of kind of being part of a country, because they're saying actually it depends, and you're always going to be tested on whether you are British enough or not. That's for me. Do you see how a lot of people view that as something that is very dangerous to them? That's a threat.
I think so, but I imagine that would be applicable for immigrants before they get citizenship rather than if they get citizenship. Like, for example, if you're an immigrant and you've got citizenship, um, I feel like perhaps you should. I mean,
No, it says withdraw citizenship from immigrants who commit crime, with the exception of some misdemeanor offenses.
yeah. Yeah, and I think, you said there with the exception of misdemeanor offences, and I, to be honest, I think it is a good policy because I think with immigrants coming into the country, we want to make sure that they coming into the country they aren't going to commit crime, and we don't see the migrant crime figures. Labour have pulled that, and well, they've stopped the generation of it anyway. But I think it's a sensible policy to.
It's a sensible policy if it's towards immigrants, which they have over here. What they say is basically, we'll deport foreign nationals immediately after their prison sentence ends. And then the next thing is withdraw citizenship, which means basically, if you're British and you've received a citizen, you've become British, like as an example for like me, they can withdraw the citizenship based on some kind of crime that I might
Mm.
commit, which I don't know what that means exactly, and who decides what crimes results in what. Like if there's a
Mm.
financial crime.
But I think what with any kind of policy, it can say, "Oh, well, we're going down this line, and this isn't good, and we're not treating immigrants equal." But I think it's just there as a precaution to ensure that immigrants coming into the country. Um, I mean, it's there as a precaution because why would we bring in immigrants that commit crimes? Do you know what I mean? Like we already have crime in the UK for people that are born. So I think it's there as more of a precaution to say, I'm trying to think of the word, a deterrent to say if you come in, we want good behaviour from immigrants, even if you do get citizenship.
You
But to be
look
fair,
at
that might be reform policy. My personal view is that should be the case. But if you've got citizenship, I think I probably wouldn't agree with that if you've got citizenship. But if you are an immigrant that commits a crime, I fully agree with deportation. Um, so just to get my position on there, but I understand that might have been
yeah.
Reform's position at the previous general election. But the I understand the position. I perhaps would be a bit more liberal on that personally. But
Yeah, I think it makes sense if you're an immigrant where you don't have the citizenship and you commit a crime over here, then yeah, you should be deported. Why are we importing this? But once you become a citizen, then that's different because then that would result in two-tier policing or two-tier systems, where it's one
mm,
system for kind of white British people and then another system for non-white British people, which is not what we want. Hopefully. The debate a lot of times these days is about Islam
mm.
and Muslim immigrants. Do you, and just to kind of, in terms of statistics and what people's concerns are, Muslims, from looking at the 2011 consensus to the 21 consensus, which is the consensus is what they do in the UK, where they ask people, how many in the household, what religion do you belong to, what race are you, just looking at the population and demographics of that population. We do that every 10 years here in the UK. From 2011, there was 4.9% Muslims. In 2021, there's 6.5% Muslims. In terms of Asian, there was 7.5%. It has become 9.3. And Christians have gone down from 59.3% in 2011 to 46.2% in 2021. But a lot of people fear the increase of Islam in the UK, and it's projected that by 2050, there will be 17.2% of the population being Muslim because of the birth rate that Muslims have versus others. Do you see that as an issue, um, or is it an overreaction?
So I'm not a scholar on Islam, and I'm learning more about it every day. But I understand there's kind of a difference between Muslims and kind of fundamental Islam, if that makes sense. I think the UK needs to accept kind of moderate Muslims, and I think it should be, and this is to any religion, to be honest. But I think the UK, we are a secular country, and I expect people to put their country before their religion. I don't think the increasing proportion of Muslims in the UK isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's the Islamic fundamentalists who are kind of threatening freedom of speech. Um, that would probably agree that if someone converts from Islam to another religion, they would be killed. Kind of the extremists. I think really that's what people are concerned about. And it's sad because I think moderate Muslims that are just trying to get on with their lives do get a bad rep from Islamic fundamentalists that do operate in, the UK, West Yorkshire. Um, and I think we just want, I don't really care like what, because we are a secular country. Like, I think when you go into kind of wanting Britain to be a Christian, we are built on Christian Judeo principles of freedom, but we don't, when you get into wanting Britain to be fully Christian or so that, you go into BNP territory, and nobody wants that. We want to be a secular country that has religious freedom, but each member of that religion needs to respect the freedom of worship, which the UK has. And I don't think Islamic fundamentalists do that. So I think we should be open to moderate Muslims. I think Zia Youssef is a great example, Reform UK leader, and other Muslims as well. But yeah, we've got to, it's not really in terms of attacks now. I think perhaps in the 2010s, there were a series of Islamic fundamentalist attacks in Europe, which were concerning. But now it is more the influence, really, and the influence over the population and influencing these kind of anti-democratic principles and, growing kind of Islamic fundamentalism in the
Mm.
UK.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of moderate Muslims have actually come to the UK because they wanted to move away from the extremism that they may have found in their countries. And it's very interesting because I come from
Yeah.
Iraq. But when I've come to the UK, you do see a lot more fundamental Islam compared to when I left Iraq.
Yeah.
It might be a bit different now. Like the burqa, the full
Yeah.
burqa, is not something that I usually would see in Iraq, or at least the capital,
Yeah.
Baghdad. But over here, I saw a lot more when I came, and I was actually very surprised
Yeah.
by that. It's interesting that the UK has allowed more of the fundamental Islam to kind of come in. And even moderate Muslims are worried about
Yeah.
that in the UK because, to your point, there is a difference between kind of Muslims and fundamental Islam, or even political Islam, which
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah. Like
There's
Islam, like Islamism, the political ideology.
Yeah, uh, that can be dangerous, but for the majority of people that are Muslim, they don't kind of connect to that.
Yeah.
For them, it's a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
It's a private thing that kind of guides them, and they for all of them, they do integrate in society, and they contribute, and they also see it as an issue. Uh, and I think that's the problem with the conversation. I think that's one of the problems with the conversations that we have about immigration and
Yeah.
about kind of the change in societies, that we group Muslims as one. A lot of people do, at least.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very difficult to have a genuine conversation because, um, you know, Muslims have very different cultures depending on where you kind of come
Yeah.
from, and different interpretations of what Islam is. So it becomes very difficult to have a serious conversation when you kind of group everyone as one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've learned a lot about, Islam and Muslims over time. I think it's, particularly with the headlines, I think perhaps in the past, they have tried to let them all in as one. And I think, with YouTube and access to videos and understanding, we're all learning a lot more nowadays. But I agree. I think we have to kick radical Islam and Islamic fundamentalists out of the United Kingdom. I mean, what you said yourself, the fact you've come from Iraq, and I don't mind, I guess, people wearing religious wear. Like, obviously, that they are part of a religion, that is going to happen. But I think perhaps in Islam there is a thing where women have to wear a hijab, or there are kind of bad consequences if there's a hair out of
But
place.
but
Or
but, but wait, they don't have to. They
yeah,
don't have to. Depends on the
yeah,
culture.
yeah,
I know a lot of cultures where they're Muslim, but they don't wear the hijab.
yeah,
The headscarf. But a lot of them do.
yeah, yeah,
So it depends.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's the thing.
but I think, I mean, I'm not a kind of, obviously I'm not familiar with the cultures and stuff, but fundamentally we have to stop people that are looking to, I guess, change our political system to one that is Islam oriented.
Yeah, like fundamental Islam. What do you think the Western countries should do differently when it comes to the integration of Muslim immigrants?
I think ensuring that they put their country before their religion. because we are a secular country, and people should look to put the United Kingdom first, rather than their religion, and perhaps kind of not just Muslims, but anybody in general, kind of, vetting people. I mean, I guess patriotism in the United Kingdom is quite low. Like, you go to America, even both the Democrats, it's not like kind of one party is anti-British, like both the Democrats, or anti-American, sorry, but both the Democrats and Republicans are trying to say, this is the image of America we want. And I know Starmer's kind of brought the Union Jack back into the Labour promotion and branding. But like when he takes kind of the winter fuel allowance from the OAPs, I just don't think that washes with anybody. So
Yeah, I think being proud to be British is something that some people do struggle with. Unlike Americans, Americans are very proud and they show it maybe a bit too much.
freedom,
Um,
freedom.
but what do you think? A lot of people are concerned that there are groups of people that are British that hate Britain. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people also don't understand what they have over here because they don't know anything else.
Mm,
When you've lived in a society where it's free and you've got a lot, the ability to do so many things, opportunity, you've got security, you've got freedom. It's only when you take that away or when you've experienced something that's outside of that do you really, really appreciate
mm,
that. Because that didn't, that's something that could have been gone.
mm,
For example, World War
mm.
II, it could have gone another
Yeah,
way and we wouldn't be able to
German
have
occupation,
those things.
without the Americans' involvement, German occupation was very much a probability. Whether it would have lasted, like
Yeah.
obviously there would have been a resistance, and we can debate about how long it will have lasted. I don't think Nazism may have, even if they'd have taken Britain, it might have fallen eventually, just because of the competing
Yeah.
sources across the world. But yeah, definitely been under threat before. Yeah.
Yeah. But do you have a concern about, or do you see it as a problem, or do you even see it as something that exists, that there are some people that actually are anti-British, that are British?
Yeah, I think there's a growing kind of anarchism, and it's kind of born out of socialism, perhaps the new Labour Party, more so Corbyn's Labour as opposed to Starmer, where they kind of look at our country's history and they judge the actions our country took in, for example, India, um, kind of in the colonies, and they pot them with the same social values as today. And I don't think that's fair. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's anyone alive right now that kind of, or there's very few people that were alive, or they were extremely young when Britain, even the Second World War was going on, even pre to that, and people have adapted their social values over time. I think the expectation that everybody has to be this moral social person. I mean, everybody's flawed, and like everybody's born and brought up with kind of or encouraged to have certain views on things, and you have to grow over time and realize that, okay, well, is this kind of expectation really true? But I think the British Empire.
Right, do you mean expectation in terms of like at that time, like that was kind of the norm or the standard, and that was they're taking the expectation of today and applying those moral values to what it was 60 years ago or 100 years ago? Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
yeah, yeah. But I think
Mm.
the British Empire over time, and regardless of the social values of it, it has influenced the Western world. It was kind of the great big force before the United States of America today. And I think it's contributed so much in terms of the industrialization of the Western world. Obviously, in World War II, fighting back against the Nazis, one of the only countries in Europe not to be invaded by Hitler. And obviously, it's difficult to invade Britain. We are an island, but we, mentioned previously, we're really up against it. But I think I sympathise with the people that do. This is going to sound weird, but I sympathise with them a bit because I think perhaps in history we kind of talk about how great Britain is and everything we did was great. So, for example, when we talk about the famine which Churchill or the leader of the British India Company caused, like we kind of overlook that. And I just think we need to talk from a balanced perspective. Like we need to talk from a
Mm.
balanced perspective. But when we look in the past, we can't take those kind of events in the past and make it our values of today. Like, we've got to think this is our history. This has happened. Like, look how far we've come. Like,
Mhm.
everybody says, oh, well, this guy was a slave. Edward Colston's a great example in Bristol, who, you know, his statue was taken down and he was a slave owner. And if he was a slave owner today, then yeah, hell yeah, we should rip his statue down. But you've got to think that guy was a philanthropist and he built most of the buildings in that area. And it's kind of just a hypocrisy in the way, like they're enjoying the fruits of what he built. And perhaps he was really
Mhm.
racist. And, you know, there was less, Britain was a mainly white population back then. They hadn't probably never interacted with people from different parts of the world, definitely more inclined to be racist. But he built it. And I think, I mean, they voted to take a statue down, which is fair enough. And now it's in a museum. But I think we can't look in we can't look back and like that's where we've come from. Like what they're bringing up now is where we've come from. That's how society has advanced, and yeah, it's scary. It's scary how people will live in the past, and people will use
Yeah.
selective history to damage countries' reputations.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense that we need to take a balanced approach and look at how far we've come. And you know, the UK has come very far. Society has changed quite a bit today in the UK. Do you think that multiculturalism has succeeded or failed?
I think on the most part it succeeds. I think there are immigrants that have come into Britain that have really well contributed and done an amazing job. I think it has come with some negative externalities. For example, uh, fundamental Islamists living in the United Kingdom and wanting to take away people's freedoms. And we just have to make sure that kind of we just have to make sure that they don't grow in influence or power. Um, you're kind of seeing these independent MPs now who kind of mainly are just getting a Muslim vote, and perhaps some of those people are moderate Muslims. But again, I don't think it's healthy to have sectarian voting in the United Kingdom. Like we want freedom of religion, but you should vote for a political candidate based on policy, as opposed to religion. As just I have to vote for this guy because he's a Muslim. Um, so I think overall it has worked. I think we just, in order for it to continue to work and for us to minimize the negative externalities that come with multiculturalism, we need to make sure that we kind of bring in cultures that complement each other and that add. So yeah.
What made kind of multiculturalism work and continue to work might be different to what we need it to continue to work going forward.
Mm.
And there might need to be a change there. You know, one of the things I was looking at the Reform UK because they just had their
Conference, I was there.
oh
Yeah,
really, yeah, was that
yeah.
good?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was like they just won the election, which is quite funny because they only got a few million votes. But no, it was great. I thought Rupert Lowe, who's an MP, former chairman of Southampton Football Club, gave a fantastic speech about how Tony Blair's Labour government kind of rejigged the kind of institutions and the regulators. But Rupert Lowe gave an amazing speech. Like everyone was good. Lee Anderson ripped up his BBC license fee, which I think most people liked on stage. But no, it was a really good atmosphere. And it was full of all sorts of different people. You go thinking, oh, perhaps there's a load of old white men, people that some people would call gammons or undesirables are there. But it was filled with loads of young people. You saw Holly Valance, who's a famous actress. She was there. A growing number of ethnic minorities. So it's people that it's kind of who shares that vision of Britain, and people are coalescing around that.
And who does share that vision of Britain? What kind of identity is it that shares that vision and that they might be scared of losing that kind of cultural identity of the UK and Britain?
The new kind of slogan of 3 words is family, community, and country. And I think it's putting country first, the United Kingdom above any religion or politics. It's kind of the community. So wanting to have, and technology is partly to blame for this, but having I guess, communities that integrate and cultures that integrate. So, for example, in London, I mean, you live in London now. I lived in West London, and a lot of people on my road kind of you don't speak to them because sometimes you don't speak the same language, or perhaps they don't speak language strong enough you can fully understand them. And I think it's about setting expectations for what we want. To kind of we want people to speak English, and we want cultures that kind of complement and invite and can enrich our domestic population. And also family, something we've not really touched on, but there's the kind of growing transgender ideology. And I think kind of when people look at headlines, they are perhaps sympathetic. These people that consider themselves transgender, they need help, they want to pander to them. But I think regardless of UK, USA, Christian, Muslim, whatever, I really don't think it's healthy for anyone. I think these operations that are taking place seem extremely dangerous. I think the caste review was a huge step forward, and it's wanting to bring back those family values, kind of sometimes the traditional family, men and women, but also I think there'll be a really good platform for reform to promote kind of homosexual couples and homosexual parents.
But just on this, what would you tell someone who is looking at the Reform UK policies and thinking, yeah, these things make sense. They're good policies. I think we need those policies to the most part, but I'm afraid of what this party might turn out to be, because there's a lot of parties that start off with kind of bringing in pride and bringing in kind of this being proud to be British and bringing those values, but then turn into something very dangerous where they focus only on one race or one
Mm.
idea
Yeah,
too much, which we've seen in Europe in the 30s and 40s.
yeah,
What would
yeah,
you tell
yeah.
those people?
So I would say a huge step has been taken forward at the conference recently, where Reform UK signed its official constitution. This is where Nigel Farage basically handed over his shares to the members, and it's now a non-profit organisation. It's still a limited company, but it's a limited company for the members as opposed to for shares. So it's now fully accountable for the members. Also, and this has been some debate within Reform, there's a line in the constitution which states that if the members want to remove the leader, it needs to be over 50% of members that write to the chairman to remove the leader. If that 50% mark is achieved, they can suggest for the leader to be removed. But there is a board that is appointed. Some members are appointed by the members, some have executive positions, but that board, I believe, will act as a check and balances for any bad actors, kind of the Tommy Robinsons, to try and infiltrate Reform and make it a fascist or racist organisation. I think Reform have now got a constitution which fundamentally prevents it from being overtaken, from being taken over, because the board will keep the kind of membership accountable.
Awesome. Do you know who's on the board?
I don't. I think it's being set up at the moment, but I know there's two positions which are directly by the members. I imagine. I don't know if Nigel kind of will be on there or will report into the board because he's the leader, but obviously the chairman, and I imagine there will be other individuals as well. But I know there's some positions which will be by appointment and some positions which will be by election.
Interesting. So they're making it a lot more democratic, more
Yeah.
balanced.
But Sim, I don't know if you heard about this or not, but basically, like Ben Habib, who was a vocal reform kind of spokesman, he kind of said, "Oh, this isn't fully democratic because if the members want to kind of get rid of a leader, like if over 50% of members want to get rid of a leader, they can suggest that to the board, but they can't force it through." But I would caveat that by saying that it's important. So, for example, let's say Tommy Robinson endorses reform, they offer in their membership fees, and perhaps Reform tries to do some due diligence and remove some of his supporters, but fail to do so. Some people flip through the cracks. They managed to get over 50% to depose Nigel and try and get someone in. The board can recognise this is happening and basically reject it and stop that from happening. Um, if we didn't have that checks and balances in place, i.e., the board, it would be open to a malign takeover.
Interesting. What's your views on Tommy Robinson?
This is like the big question for any Reform UK member, supporter. Farage has always distanced himself from him. I I fundamentally believe that they Tommy Robinson is more talking about the cultural things relating to the UK. I don't think he's got political ambitions, and I don't think he doesn't want to be in organised politics. He wants to basically stage protests, and he's been in and out of prison. He's got some legal troubles right now. But that being said, I have watched a few of his documentaries, and I think he's shed some really good light on the kind of rape gangs that were in the north of England, in Rotherham and places like that. But I think it's fair to say he's been in a few fights. He's had a few legal troubles. I definitely don't think he should be in Reform. I don't think he wants to be in elected politics, to be honest, either. He's kind of come out saying like, "Oh, Tyson Farage, you guys are just Tories," but I don't think that's true. I think Farage has not been in the Tories for 30 years and was always against the EU. And Tyson supporting Nigel with Brexit, and this is very much a independent movement, not kind of really influenced by any Tories at the moment. But because maybe there are some Reform supporters which like, yeah, they should bring Tommy in, but I think that would be political suicide. I mean, you would just give the media the ammunition to be like, okay, let's just machine gun these guys down. Easy step. And perhaps some people would see through that, but I don't believe Tommy Robinson anyway wants to be in Reform UK. And I don't think I wouldn't want Tommy Robinson to be in Reform UK either. I think the different movements, he wants to stage protests, demonstrations, perhaps do some more documentaries. I see him as kind of a investigative journalist, obviously with certain criminal kind of convictions and background. But yeah, I think they're fundamentally different movements, and I don't think it will happen.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are some links. Like obviously, I imagine Tommy Robinson probably wants to reduce immigration, but then again, he's more talking about kind of, he bangs on about like the percentage of white British in the UK, and I don't think Reform and Farage don't really stand for that. They stand for sensible immigration. Like let's say you have let's just say hypothetically, all of the UK right now is white British, but looking at the current immigration statistics, you have 600,000 people that leave the UK. If you bring in people from outside of the UK, you are going to bring in people that are non-white British, and that proportion is going to decline. Now, I probably agree that proportion has declined far too much. I think it declined by 10% over the last decade, which is that probably shows the level of immigration we're facing. But it's not primarily for that reason why Reform wants to reduce immigration. It's more for the economic consequences and partly the cultural consequences as well. So I see them as fundamentally different movements, but this is going to be a question which goes on in Reform sectors, I'm sure. I mean, I know, for example, a Reform UK guy, a spokesman or a candidate came out and endorsed Tommy and said all this, and then, he got kicked out. But I think it's completely fair enough from Reform. Like, we can't be associated with this guy. Like, he's a criminal. He's he's got legal troubles. Like, we can't be associated with him.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's a bit extreme, and the media would have
a field day. Field day.
Yeah, they would love for that to happen. I think
it's how he articulates himself as well. I think that's the big problem that a lot of people see. Like, he just kind of swears and shouts, and no political party wants a guy like that.
Yeah, I think he's highlighted some things that are serious and that should be highlighted, but at the same time, the way he speaks doesn't cite violence.
And he, for example, I think Reform makes that distinction between the moderate Muslims that want to succeed in the UK and the Islamic fundamentalists. I don't think Tommy Robinson makes that distinction. I've seen clips of him talking about how Hindus are great, Muslims, no. And I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, and I understand that that's kind of, for me, I always say it's his experience. If I had the exact same experience as him, I would come to the same exact conclusions. It's unfortunate that he's had those experiences. It is his experiences, those, and that's why his experiences made those interpretations and conclusions based on those experiences. But I think that the way he speaks and the message that he sends out is going to create more conflict and more violence. and that is definitely a problem. Jack, thank you so much for this conversation.